American Enlightenment included an empiricist moment, a moment in which the importance of the body, the importance of sensation, the importance of evidence from the senses trumped any sort of deductive rationality, any sort of received wisdom, any sort of doctrinal authority.
Empiricism is an old term, comes from initially from the notion of quack doctors in the Middle Ages, empirics, people who went around and tried to diagnose folks just sort of off the cuff, what you would call an alternative medical person today. But it eventually came to mean, in its most generic form, that everything we know in the world comes by way of perception. And most of the American philosophers would, in that sense, call themselves empiricists.
The Lockean moment in early British empiricism played an important role also in the ideology of certainly the 18th century in America.
The British empiricists are most often identified as John Locke and David Hume, and in many ways Bishop Berkeley, who is an idealist as well, but his idealism carried with it the traits of this this theory of being that says everything is a part with the nominalism. The claim was that the universe is constituted of little bits and pieces, and that there are no sort of general connectors and relations, it's just the little bitty pieces. And so what perception does is take these little bitty pieces in, and we reflect them in a very straightforward way in our minds. So it's just facts and then perceptions or percepts. And then we take the percepts and we can do all sorts of things with them in terms of science.
And so one would argue, I think, that the residue of Lockean empiricism, which you even find in religious figures like Jonathan Edwards, is one of the first moments in which the importance of a certain version of experience became, I think, paramount.
He was quite a unique figure. He assimilated philosophical ideas and ideas of the Enlightenment in science with his theological tradition.
Yes, I think there is something distinctive about the American strand of philosophy that goes from the Puritans up through Edwards, through Emerson, and I would include Jefferson and Whitman here, and also through the Federalist Papers, through the work of Chauncey Wright, Nicholas St. John Green, and Charles Peirce.
But it's often argued that it isn't really until the time of Oliver Wendell Holmes and then James Dewey and their followers that experience, as a kind of God term, we might say, developed a certain priority in American philosophy.
Philosophy in America really becomes really comes into its flowering in the post-Civil War period. In terms of what we would recognize as philosophy, this very broad senses in which you could talk about people's views on things, and that comes earlier, but it really is in the post-Civil War period with the figures and the prominent figures that we begin to identify, like Peirce and James and Dewey and Royce and Mead. I mean, this is a great period of flowering at the end of the 19th century.
But what other empiricists, radical empiricists, phenomenologists...
Peirce also said that the first order of business for philosophy is phaneroscopy, as he put it in his quirky way, or phenomenology.
And others later in the history of this tradition tried to show, is that there's much more to be seen and observed and experienced than this nominalistic, sort of thin version that we got from what I would call British empiricism, and the history of British empiricism.
A phenomenology, a description of how the world actually grabs us hot off the griddle of the world, as William James put it.
They were also very interested in what might be called the expansion of experience beyond its purely scientific and empiricist notions in the Lockean sense. So someone like James in particular developed a notion of radical empiricism which expanded the idea of experience beyond pure sensations to something deeper that included feelings, included a kind of level of interiority as well as a level of immersion in the world that could in fact admit even religious experience. And one of course, the great books that James wrote, The Varieties of Religious Experience, was an attempt to be as welcoming as possible to non-scientific experiences give them a certain, at least, validity as something to be questioned rather than simply dismissed out of hand.